One of the most common things that professional women ask me is about resumes. And specifically, Ashley, I've been working in the same job in the same industry for years. Will people look at my resume and not see the value in it and not see how I can transition to other industries? And the truth is that your resume is not the primary document for helping you transition to other industries. It's actually the cover letter. There is a lot that the resume does, right? The resume is going to help you position yourself as an expert. The resume is going to help you tell the story of all the amazing things that you've done across the course of your career. And yes, of course, the resume is going to speak to the value of that amazing work in one document. But the actual document that tells the story of why you've been doing this work and the impact of the lives that you changed or the work that you've done and how you can leverage that same work to transition industries is actually the cover letter. So if you're worried that you've been at the same job for 5 years, 7 years, 15 years, and a new organization won't see your value, no need to worry about that on the resume because that's what the cover letter is for. And furthermore, there are other things that you should be worried about when it comes to your resume, and being at the same employer for a long time is not one of them. I'm Ashley. I'm the lead mentor with Mentor Me, and today we're going to talk about some resume red flags. I want to talk to you about some of the things that you need to look out for on your resume, just to make sure that it's not full of these red flags and that you're not really positioning yourself as an expert on paper. So the number one thing that I see missing from resumes that really needs to be on there to help you stand out as a job candidate and position yourself as an expert is you answering the question, to what end? Oftentimes on resumes, people have lists and lists and bullets of things that they've done. I've done this, I've done that, I was on this team, I was on that team, I was on this committee, I was on that committee, I implemented this strategy, I implemented that strategy, I supervised this person, I supervised that person, I trained here, I trained there, right? Oftentimes on resumes, people have a list and list of things that they've done on their resume, and they think that that's enough to position them as a top candidate for an employer. But the truth is that that's simply not enough to really be positioned as an expert, right? And to really gain the attention of high caliber employers, you need to not only say what you've done on your resume, but you need to say the outcomes that that work drove. So for example, let's say that in your work, you're responsible for supervising a team of 5 people, right? It's not enough to say that I supervise and train 5 full-time staff members. You need to say I supervise and train 5 full-time staff members to help them drive outcomes in increasing customer satisfaction, which is increased by 12% year over year, right? Through using my strategies in, customer engagement, fast action response times, and, follow up with new clients in 3 days, right? So often when it comes to really positioning yourself as an expert, women are just on their resume listing things that they've done, like a laundry list of things that you've done, but that's not enough. You need to talk about the things that you've done as well as the outcomes that that work has driven, right? So that's resume red flag number 1, that you're not talking about the outcomes. You're not talking about the impact. You're simply listing things that you've done in your work, but you're not talking about the outcomes. So that's a red flag. And if you do that on your resume, you're not going to see the kind of callbacks. You're not going to see the kind of engagement with employers that you really want to see, right? So that's red flag number 1. The second red flag that I see on resumes is a lack of quantification, right? You don't have any numbers and any data on your resume. When you work a job, you have goals, you have outcomes, you have things that your employer expects you to do. On your resume, you need to be able to articulate that you've done those things and to what impact, right? So it's not enough to say that I'm responsible for, client retention, and I retain clients. You need to say, I'm responsible for client retention, and we've seen a 30% increase in client retention year over year, right? You need to say the percent increase or the percent decrease. Maybe you're responsible for decreasing customer complaints. Well, the customer complaints under your leadership should have decreased, and you need to say by what percent. Maybe you're responsible for budget savings, right? So you need to say that you've saved 4% more than last year. Or maybe you're responsible for talent acquisition, right? You guys have hired 5% more people and retained them at a higher rate than last year, right? You need to quantify the number, the percent increase, the percent decrease, the amount of money you saved, the number of people that have joined the team since you've been there, the number of people who have come back on the team, right? Like, you need to be able to really quantify the impact of your work. You can do that in percent, like I said, in percent increases and percent decreases, in money saved, in clients acquired and clients retained. You can do that in the number of programs you serve, the number of counties or communities, or the sheer number of people that your work has impacted, right? It's critical that you quantify on your resume. It's not enough to just say you've done things. You have to say the outcome of that work, and you need to quantify the outcome of that work. The third red flag that I want to talk about are acronyms and jargon. Too often, especially for women who've worked in an industry for a long period of time, their resume is full of jargon, right? You've got acronyms to describe things that you do in your employer that no one else knows about. You've got jargon that no one really uses outside of your organization. You really want to screen your resume and remove all the acronyms, remove all of the jargon, and just spell out exactly what you're saying. There's just so many acronyms that people use, instead of RTIs, put, retained time in process, right? Like, whatever the acronym means, spell that out in your resume. Too often we're using acronyms because we figure, everyone knows what we're doing. And this isn't, particularly if you're trying to transition industries, from one industry to another industry, they're not going to understand those acronyms. But even if you're staying in the same industry and you're just changing institutions or organizations, you still need to cut out the jargon. You still need to cut out the acronyms. And this is important, not just because they may not understand it, but because you have to understand that often search committees are not just the hiring manager. It's not just the people who would be working on your team. Sometimes on search committees, there's people from other teams. And so while that may be a common phrase or common language, in your organization or even in your industry, other people on search committees may not understand that. So make sure on your resume you do not have acronyms, that you are not using jargon. Really, you want to make sure that you are being very intentional about speaking plainly and clearly in your materials, right? So we've talked about 3 resume red flags, right? We've talked about not telling the full story, right? You just list what you do, and you can't do that. That's a red flag. You need to be able to say what you've done and what the impact of that work was, right? You need to be able to talk about the outcome, the impact, the result of that work. Number 2, you want to make sure that you quantify in that resume, right? You want to make sure that you speak directly to the number of people impacted, the amount of money saved, the amount of people retained, right? You really need to speak to the quantifiable outcome of the work. And let me be clear here that when it comes to quantification, it doesn't mean that qualification doesn't matter. If you really, made your team feel good, if they have more affinity, if they feel more connected to the work, that matters too, right? It's okay to talk about qualifiable things in your resume, but the red flag is if there's no quantified stuff. So just make sure that the quantification is there. And then last but not least, we talked about acronyms and jargon. You really just want to make sure that your materials are free of acronyms and jargon. You want to make sure that that can just be a distraction, and you want to make sure that your resume is free of that. And then last but not least, I just want to put this myth, I want to dispel this myth, right? There's this huge myth that your resume needs to be one page, that, if it's more than one page, recruiters aren't going to look at it, they're going to ignore it, they're not going to pay attention to it. And that's simply not true. I don't know where this lie came from, but it's not accurate. It's it is misinformation. And, you know, particularly because I work primarily with professional women who have 3, 5, 10, 15 years of experience. Girl, you have too much experience to have a one-page resume. Like, that don't even make sense given your level of expertise. So I really want to invite you to like release that. That's bad information. That's not for you. Certainly we are not looking for resumes in this day and age that are, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9 pages. That's overkill. You need to be clear, concise in your resume, but it doesn't have to be one page. I don't know where that came from. And in fact, if you're applying for a high level role and your resume is one page, that just gives me pause. Like, that gives me concern that you don't really have the skill set, because why is your resume only one page? Like, it doesn't make sense. There is no magic number for the number of pages. What we want to focus less on the number of pages and more on, are we telling the story, right? Are we really being intentional about speaking to the value of our expertise in a meaningful way? So that's what we really want to focus on. So those are the resume red flags. If you have questions about your resume, questions about how to position yourself as an expert, questions about really how to make sure that you are leveraging your materials in a way that's going to make employers take notice, make sure you shoot me a DM. You can send me a DM. Hey, Ashley, I watched your resume red flag video. I have questions. I have concerns. I want to get some help with this. Send me a message. I'm happy to answer questions and make sure that you feel fully prepared to position yourself as an expert through your materials. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.